Welcome to another RKMCS Criminology lecture series. My name is Hunter, and I am your lecturer for today. Our topic falls under law enforcement administration, specifically comparative police systems. It is my hope that after this short presentation, you could be able to gain insights about world policing, from its early European beginnings to the current modern policing worldwide. So, you can take notes, or simply pause and rewind this video, for you to be able to follow through. Before we proceed on the main topic, let me share with you the concept of the word comparative. The word comparative denotes the degree or grade by which a person, thing, or other entity has a property or quality greater or less in extent than that of another. For instance, comparative policing is the process of outlining the similarities and differences of one police system with that of another, in order to discover insights in the field of international policing, or coming out with best practices in crime prevention and law enforcement. The theories and practices in law enforcement have been compared in several studies under various circumstances. The goal is to test whether the theory and practice in policing needs modernization, to meet the demands of the present trends in crime fighting. Comparative research is usually carried out by the safari method, meaning, a researcher visits another country, or by collaborative method, where the researcher communicates with a foreign researcher. In the context of this discussion, the study of comparative police system, criminal justice and law is a fairly new field, and has corresponded with rising interest in a more established field known as comparative criminology. As an introduction, about world policing. Police systems around the world demonstrates a diversity of police organizations. Some are religious in nature, or at least inspired by religion, others based on legal traditions, some are influenced by ideology and political theory. The comparison between city police results in more of similarities than differences. Regardless of the nature of policing around the world in the 21st century, police organizations share more common traits. With the advent of sophisticated crime and terrorist networks, police battle the enemies of social order on a number of fronts, in many cases sharing a common enemy while thousands of miles apart. Police organizations also share many similar frustrations, whether in Africa, Asia, or the Americas. Jurisdictional disputes and turf squabbles continue to plague police organizations, large or small, coordinated or uncoordinated, centralized or decentralized. Any definition of policing prior to the modern era is problematic, due in part to the broad range of duties expected of so-called police in previous centuries. Regardless of their tasks, police duties were typically performed, through mutual obligation by community members. Even in pre-literate societies, individuals were often expected to act in a police capacity, whether bringing to justice a person who threatened the community, or exercising personal vengeance prior to a judicial institution. Until the 18th century, military and paramilitary police forces were the rules rather than the exceptions. Now, let's talk about the European traditions. The origins of policing in continental Europe can be traced back to the Middle Ages, but major developments took place in the 18th and 19th centuries that laid the foundations for modern state police systems. By the middle of the 18th century, Europe's absolutist rulers, seeking a modern police force, looked to France, where Paris was considered the best policed city in Europe. European continental innovations stemming from Napoleonic France have had a dramatic impact on the development of centralized state policing throughout the world. At the Congress of Vienna in 1814 and 1815, Tsar Alexander I of Russia was so impressed by the Austrian police, both civil and military, that he arranged members of the Russian embassy staff in Vienna to draw up recommendations for the formation of gendarme regiments in Russia, based on the Austrian model. It was not long before Russian gendarmes, often referred to as mounted police, were operating alongside the army, under the direction of police commanders, in Moscow and St. Petersburg. In the 18th century, continental police functions transcended the traditional duties conducted by common law police. Germany had special forces devoted to individual tasks, including insurance police, mining police, water and dike police, field and forest police, cattle disease police, hunting police, fisheries police, building police, and so forth. All of these forces represented state functions and were responsible to state oversight, with governmental activity and regulated by the police. The Russian police. By the 20th century, Russia was the most policed nation. The word police was used for the first time in Russian legislation by Peter the Great, when he set up a police administration for St. Petersburg in 1718. This force was not a separately organized force, nor was it similar to contemporary police systems in Europe. But by this period, the greatest influence on the police force stemmed from the Paris police model, founded by Louis XIV in the 1660s. By 1666, the police position of Lieutenant General of Police had been established. The police were responsible for a variety of administrative and judicial tasks, including controlling prices, weights, and measures, inspecting markets, apprehending criminals, and conducting surveillance of suspected traders. Now, let's look at the French and British police. French police origins can be traced back to the 16th century. 300 years later, mounted gendarmes and archers consolidated to form the nucleus of what eventually became known as the gendarmerie. Gendarmerie is a slang for police officers on the continent. From 19th century creation of British policing, historians noted that what set apart French policing from the British model was its long continuity. A second important variation was the more administrative nature of French policing, that brought it more into the realm of civil life. But the glaring difference between British policing and the French was that, British policing was considered an expression of the community, as opposed to being derived from the king. During the French Revolution of 1789 to 1799, a national gendarmerie was entrusted with maintaining internal and external security. During the Napoleonic Wars of the early 1800s, many countries within the French circle adopted similar police units. The gendarmerie model of policing influenced France's neighbors, Italy and Spain. Most notably, the Italy's Carabinerie and Spain's Guardia Civil. The reason England did not adopt this model was because England's insular nature, which led to less involvement in conflicts with its neighbors, during the 16th and 17th centuries. In 1799 Napoleon I appointed Joseph Fouche, as the Minister of the General Police of the Republic of France. His ministry was considered mostly political in nature and he was reportedly unconcerned with such ordinary police matters as vice and street lighting. From the start, Fouche demonstrated a remarkable acumen well suited to police work. Considered the father of police intelligence operations, during his tenure he reorganized the Paris police, initiating the prefecture system that exists to this day. Fouche is credited with establishing a centralized police force that was responsible to the national government. His administrative innovations included setting up police departments that were proportional to the populations of various urban units. Over time, he became a proponent of preventive policing, anticipating by 3 decades some of the principles of British statesman Sir Robert Peel. Now, let's talk about the antecedents of the British police. By the end of the 18th century, policing in London was for the most part still the domain of the parish constables, watchmen, and other amateurs. Most visitors to Europe would consider London more disorderly and less safe than Paris, or even Munich, which one historian described as well policed as early as the late 1780s. Despite the relative effectiveness of police in Paris and Munich, most English residents would favor the rampant disorder of London and other English environs rather than give up their cherished freedoms and make the transition to a more oppressive regime. In the 18th century, English reformers visualized a police system that would be more preventive in nature. Much of the early groundwork for the London Metropolitan Police was laid by the Fielding brothers. Henry Fielding, during his 6-year tenure at this post, he implemented several policies that led to increased safety on the streets of London. He introduced the Bow Street Runners, a specially formed group of 6 to 80 constables who ran to the aid of crime victims and pursued malefactors, in order to earn rewards for their capture. Fielding demonstrated foresight in police matters in his 1751 essay, An Inquiry into the Causes of the Late Increase of Robbers, which called for a professional, full-time police force. One of his first goals as police magistrate was to stem the corruption emanating from the Bow Street office. Fielding funded the publication of the Covent Garden Journal, a precursor to the Scotland Yard Police Gazette, which was dedicated to educating the public about the rising crime problem. But he still faced reluctance on the part of the public to welcome a professional police force. Following the death of Henry Fielding in 1754, his campaign for professional policing was taken up by his half-brother John Fielding. Blinded at age 19, John succeeded Henry as magistrate and head of the Bow Street Runners in 1754. His 1755 pamphlet, Plan for Preventing Robberies Within 20 Miles of London, explained his strategy for breaking up organized gangs of criminals, which had plagued the periphery of London for decades. 3 years later, he oversaw the publication of a similar pamphlet, an account of the origin and effects of a police set on foot by the Duke of Newcastle on a plan suggested by the late Henry Fielding. An astonishing detective despite his visual impairment, Fielding, sometimes referred to as the Blind Beak, reportedly could identify hundreds of criminals by voice alone. During his tenure with Bow Street, he made this office the official police headquarters with 2 officers always posted at the ready to pursue highwaymen. Despite the entreaties of the Fielding brothers, Their vision for policing was ahead of its time by almost a half-century. In 1792, Justice of the Peace Patrick Colquhoun became interested in police reform through the work of the Fielding brothers, and after detailed conversations with English philosopher Jeremy Bentham, Colquhoun's investigations led him to write a treatise on the police of the metropolis, published in 1797. Among the more important police concepts laid out in the book, was the idea of crime prevention, a radical departure for the traditionally reactive police establishment of Europe. Colquhoun was perhaps one of the greatest influences on Sir Robert Peel, who was credited with creating the first modern police force in 1829. Colquhoun was also credited with the creation of the Thames River Police in 1789. In 1800 his treatise on the commerce and police of the River Thames saw publication. His writings led to improved police professionalism and the first systematic examination of crime costs and origins. An advocate of paid professional policing and of recruitment and management under a central authority free of political interference, he spurred police reform and introduced new solutions to maintaining public order in an era of urbanization and industrialization. Next was London Metropolitan Model. Although Robert Peel has received most of the credit for developing modern policing, some scholars subscribe to the belief that he deserves credit more for introducing the bill that inaugurated the London Metropolitan Police experiment and for his selection of Sir Charles Rowan and Sir Richard Mayne, who actually organised and planned the new police force following Parliament's passage of the Metropolitan Police Act of 1829. Regardless of who deserves the credit, the establishment of the London Metropolitan Police replaced the age-old system of the night watch with regularly paid, full-time officers. Under the direction of Rowan and Mayne, the force overcame the trepidation of the public about a strong police force by improving community relations and reinforcing its image as a civilian police force. From Europe, let's move to the Asian region. Let's look at policing development in Asia. While it is almost impossible to find a comprehensive translation for the term police in Chinese, there are at least two different translations. Public security organs, or jiguan, is the formal term for all police organizations from the high ministerial to the lowest local level, while jingcha refers to the substantive duties of vigilance and investigation. Chinese police traditions predate Robert Peel's model by more than 2,000 years, originating in the Shang era of 1700 to 1100 BC, a millennium before China became a single state. During this pre-imperial period, clans formed the most important social structure, and, like the Anglo-Saxon tithing system, clansmen maintained order and security through self-policing. The Chinese system of mutual responsibility can be traced back to legalist reformer Shang Yang 338 BC. His advice was taken to heart when the people of the rapidly expanding Qin kingdom were organized into groups of fives and tens mutually to control one another and share one another's punishments. By mandating this system of mutual trust, the seeds were sown for the mutual mistrust of neighbors and associates that became a hallmark of China's 20th century police state. In the 13th century, rising crime led to a demand for more social control. Much in the way that modern peace officers claim that more police means less crime, the Chinese also believed this unproven axiom. But, from a medieval perspective, Chinese foresight is striking, particularly when increased emphasis was placed on employing a better quality of officer. In the 1600s, a northeastern tribe known as the Manchu invaded China with the support of a formidable number of civil servants who had been disenfranchised during the previous Ming dynasty 1368-1644. The Manchu have been credited with reforming and strengthening the peasant civilian police system, and for the first time in Chinese history, the country had a nationwide police system complemented by a network of plainclothes policemen who kept tabs on the lives of Chinese citizens. By the early 18th century, this system was used in a number of capacities, including such official tasks as census reporting, surveillance, and registration activities. In 1901 a proclamation was issued ordering the establishment of police brigades in every Chinese province. At the same time, Chinese police reformers concluded that the creation of a modern police force based on Western and Japanese models could go a long way toward counterbalancing the power of elites and local gentry. In 1902, a 500-man police force was established southwest of Beijing and provided with its own training academy. Japanese and Western policing would exert tremendous influence on the development of Chinese policing. The Japanese were so influential that the Chinese word for police jingcha originated from the Japanese keisatsu. The Japanese influence indirectly brought European traditions into China in the early 1900s as well. In 1871, following the Meiji Restoration in Japan, Tokyo made the transition from a system of constables to a metropolitan police force. The following year, Toshiyoshi Kawaji was sent to Europe to study contemporary police systems. He returned in 1873 with a program of reorganization based on German and French police systems. What he learned strongly influenced the Tokyo Police Academy, and during its first 6 years more than 1,000 sergeants and inspectors admitted through the program. The Japanese police system would then serve as a model for the Chinese, until the late 1920s, after which German police advisors would play an increasingly important role. The first efforts at police modernization in China, at the turn of 20th century, were quite different from advances that would be made under the nationalist regime, 2 decades later. The 1930s saw the new nationalist government set up its own police corps. President Chiang Kai-shek was reportedly an admirer of German and Austrian policing. In fact, the Chinese word for public security, Gonggen, is rooted in the German translation. Influenced by centralized police activities in Japan and Europe, efforts were soon in place to standardize Chinese practices such as increase the number of officers and police budgets, and the introduction of a uniform fingerprinting system. Here, there is a bit of historical irony because the system of fingerprint identification had been used in China centuries earlier, as a way for illiterate individuals to sign contracts. So, while the Chinese had been acquainted with the types of patterns of fingerprints for hundreds of years, they did not take the lead in developing a system of classification, until the Europeans did. As Adolf Hitler consolidated his power in Germany in the 1930s, Chiang Kai-shek cultivated contacts with German advisors. Thus, in 1933, he sent a delegation to Berlin to study German military organization. At the same time, Chiang Kai-shek allowed German police experts to teach at the military and police academies in China. So, over the next 5 years, a number of nationalist police officers were sent to Berlin and Vienna to study German policing. However, most of these students were barred from courses outside basic instruction on crime detection and precinct duties. Rubbing at these restrictions, Chiang Kai-shek intervened to allow 3 of his subordinates to train with German security squads and the secret police in 1936. So, as recently as the 1970s, some of these former trainees, then living in Taiwan, looked back reflectively to this period, exalting German efficiency and lawfulness. But despite the influence of Japanese and German advisors, the Chinese regarded the Americans as the authority when it came to professional organization and training. Apparently, there was mutual admiration being traded between the two cultures. According to police reformer August Vollmer, he was inspired, in his quest for a better educated college cops, by the writings of Confucius. Vollmer was accorded the fame as father of police professionalism. He placed great faith in the Confucian philosophy. In the early 1930s, one Vollmer protégé served a stint as advisor to the Nanking Ministry of Interior, prior to the overthrow of Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government in 1949. The police force, including officers in Taiwan and mainland China, numbered almost 1 million at that time. Let's go to American policing. United States exemplifies decentralization in policing, in stark contrast to the centralized model that dominates most of the world's forces. British, French, Spanish, and Dutch colonies left their imprints on the American criminal justice system, but none was more influential in determining the course of policing as the British. Between 1608 and the end of the American Revolution, most American sheriffs and constables were appointed by colonial governors and performed the same tasks as their English counterparts. As the nation struggled with the forces of urbanization and industrialization during the early 19th century, communities created civil police forces, making the transition from amateur unpaid watchmen to more formal arrangements. In the first years of the new century, Boston became the first city to require by statute a permanent night watch. In 1844, New York City's traditional night watch was legislated out of existence and replaced with a new system comprised of separate day and night police forces, making New York the first city to merge its day and night forces into a uniformed police department along the lines of the Peel model. Between 1870 and 1900, most large American cities established professional police forces. Police chiefs, such as Berkeley's August Vollmer and Cleveland, Ohio's Fred Kohler, rose to prominence after introducing a number of progressive reforms. Vollmer is considered the originator of the modern American police organization. Among his achievements was establishing a departmental code of ethics, introducing requirements all police officers attend college, and instituting the use of lie detectors and motorcycle and automobile patrols. State policing gained increased support due to the ineffectiveness of county law enforcement and the rise in labor conflicts between 1910 and 1915. Between 1915 and 1923, 27 states created some type of state police force, although some created highway patrols in response to the growing popularity of the automobile by citizens and criminals. Others adhered to the Pennsylvania paramilitary model of policing. The onset of the Great Depression stimulated the state police movement, leading to the creation of 15 state police units between 1929 and 1941. Of these, 12 followed the highway patrol model. The 1940s and 1950s saw police departments across the nation continue the trend toward professionalization. Police reformers such as William Parker in Los Angeles and Orlando Wilson in Chicago personified the model of professional, impartial law enforcement. By 2001, most major police departments had adopted the community-based policing philosophy, demonstrating a dramatic shift from traditional reactive policing to a more proactive approach. There you go, ladies and gentlemen, an introduction to comparative police systems. I hope that you were able to refresh your knowledge about world policing. Thank you for watching and listening. Kindly like our Facebook page and subscribe with our YouTube channel for more educational videos. Also, please visit and sign up at our website www.criminologysolutions.com.